think of the nuke? A Smith & Wesson ain't teach us to shoot. You think there'd be as many plays out there if there was no boost? Matter of fact, what if white man hung on for noose? Would it still be cool to say nigga? Or maybe we would make sick figures? Or would we wanna be crackers? And all the whites would be rappers? What if Martin Luther King survived? You think the New Orleans flood would have caused him to drop? I wonder what if and see what is. Stand back from the picture and ask yourself why. What if life wasn't all you thought? What if everything you knew was gone? What if we switched the rights and wrongs? You think you'd change your route to the road we on? What if life wasn't all you thought? What if everything you knew was gone? What if we switched the rights and wrongs? You think you'd change your route to the road we on? If Christopher Wallace never got murked, how much money would Sean Carter be worth? What if Tupac never came with the flame? Would the game still have change filled with these lames? What if Jabari wasn't speeding down the street? What if the bullet Malcolm sent never hit Zeke? A black guy dropped off at a house instead of a stop? Or Ali never got bopped by the cops? What if the little homie Easy didn't die? Stay back from the picture and ask yourself why. What if life wasn't all you thought? What if everything you knew was gone? What if we switched the rights and wrongs? You think you'd change your route to the road we on? What if life wasn't all you thought? What if everything was gone? What if we switched the rights and wrongs? You think you'd change your route to the road we on? I don't know. What if? What if? What if?
Together but we're falling apart. welcome to the Fourth Branch program. Glad you can make it. I am MD. This program is dedicated exclusively for those with common sense, a spirit of patriotism, and a determination for a more perfect year. Stay tuned as we begin the discussion of a very important, interesting, and enlightening topic. Hope to hear from you soon. Happy listening.
Hello everyone, I am MD and this is the Fourth Branch program, the place for common sense. Welcome. Today we have a very rich program for you. We will begin by talking about race relation in America. We have been talking about this particular topic for the past couple of months, and today we will couple it with anti-Semitism. We will also take a quick look at what's been making news and will continue to do so for the next year or so, which is the road to 2020. There are plenty of candidates vying for the Oval Office, and we'll find out exactly how they're gonna get there. And we will also take a look at a very hot item, anti-Semitism. When is a language towards Israel or towards the Jews is anti-Semitic, or is there any point in time when a language which is not favorable towards Israel or towards the Jews, not anti-Semitic? That and a lot more when we return.
In 1996, a small network by the name of Fox News was launched with just 17 million viewers. Today, with over 100 million people watching regularly, Fox has become the greatest threat to our democracy, constantly bombarding the airwaves with false information, distortion of facts, and outright lies presented to its audience as news. Fox has created an army of blissful ignorance. According to a survey, 82% of Fox viewers are ignorant of facts and the truth. To keep millions of people in ignorance not only prevents democracy from flourishing, but it also clears the path to authoritarianism, to dictatorship. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Let me finish by saying that democracy cannot survive in an environment where truth and facts do not matter. At Fox, truth and facts do not matter. Indeed, democracy in America is in jeopardy. It is a crisis the country can no longer ignore.
If you join us for the first time, welcome. War on Blacks is a topic in which we discuss race relations in America. Obviously, the title, the banner, will be, as it has been for many, a shocking surprise. Some even ask, which war on Blacks? I strongly suggest that you take a look at People Branch YouTube channel. That's the People Branch YouTube channel. and follow the steps on your screen to visit the People Branch YouTube channel. And when you get there, search for subjects such as race relation, institutionalized racism, war on blacks. And there you will find a number of videos we've already created based on this particular episode, based on this particular topic, which is race relation in America, but which may be under one of the banners that we just mentioned: war on blacks, race relations, or institutionalized racism. And while you're on the People Branch YouTube channel, I strongly encourage you to subscribe to the Fourth Branch program. Subscribe to the Fourth Branch channel in order for us to be able to send you invites, update, and as well as to keep you abreast of activities we have with the Fourth Branch program. Now, again, if you've been here for the first time, welcome. This program started quite a few months ago, and we went as far back as the period of slavery in order to understand the dynamic of race relation in America, the interaction between blacks and whites. We have been making our way towards modern time. We're not there yet. In fact, we left off at the bottom of the Civil War bridge. So you can imagine we've already covered a lot of grounds when it comes to this particular topic. If you listen to anyone talking about race relation, and we don't mean because Donald Trump is in the Oval Office. Donald Trump is just a symptom of the problem. So we did not start this program because of Donald Trump. In fact, you may have, if you've been watching this program, and if you have a chance to visit the People Branch YouTube channel and pretty much listen to all those videos we already made, you will find out that we have actually been working on this program well before Donald Trump even fathomed the idea of bidding for the presidency of the United States. In other words, Donald Trump is not the reason for the program. This symptom, the problem that we talk about in this program, race relation, has absolutely nothing to do with Donald Trump. Donald Trump is a symptom. He has simply exacerbated the problem because if there is fire and you pour oil into it, then you do not help. However, the individual who pour the oil on the fire may not necessarily be the same individual who started the fire. Now, having said that, race relation in America is a very complex issue, and that's the reason we found it necessary to go all the way back to the period of slavery in order to understand exactly what's going on. And because we've made such great progress, we believe that we are at a point where from time to time we leave you, the audience, at the bottom of the Civil War bridge and take a giant leap into the present time in order to bring forth contemporaneous examples and try to see how those events which happen today, how they can we can understand how we evolve from that period of slavery, now at the bottom of the Civil War bridge, and if we fast forward to today, to try to get an understanding as to what exactly has happened. In fact, if you've been watching this program, you would have heard, or you would continue to hear, the repetition of this sentence: what happened to blacks after the Civil War. In fact, that's really the premise of what's left in the discussion of this program, because we've already left behind the Civil War, we left behind the period of slavery. So the question is, what happened to blacks beyond the Civil War? Now, during this 2020 presidential election, you may already be abreast of the fact that a number of candidates already start talking about an issue that we've raised in the past, reparation. Now, this is an interesting topic. We're not there yet because we are more concerned about things that impact us right now, that impacts our daily lives, and that can jeopardize or that can influence future generation. Now, this is not to say reparation is to be shrugged off, because we mentioned that, we talked about that. In fact, we have advocated for that very that very subject, because it is important to recognize when wrongdoing is done to a group, to a generation, and for a society to remedy, at least to try to remedy for the wrongdoing. Now, War on Blacks banner is used not to sensationalize the discussion of the topic. A number of people seem to think so. In fact, a number of individuals who have asked the question seem to think that we've used this banner to make it sound like there is really major problems in terms of race relations in America. The reverse is to suggest there is none. Now, we mentioned before, and we'll mention it again, and we will continue to mention it as long as we host this program, that there are two very distinct large groups of whites in the country. There are millions of whites who are racist and who discriminate, and there are millions of others who are not racist, who do not discriminate. And this is not something new. This is not something that just happened. It has always been that way. In fact, even during the period of slavery, as we already discussed, we found that that's exactly the way it was. There were millions of whites who benefited of slavery, who wanted slavery around forever, and there were also millions of others who were disgusted by the practice, who actually put their own lives on the line in order to try to put an end to slavery. So this story about division, this line between the two groups of whites in the country, have always existed. There is nothing new about it. But is the banner War on Blacks warranted? Now, you may have received a tweet or an alert or a note, an invite that says call the devil by its name. One of the major problems, one of the biggest obstacles to solve a problem is to refuse to recognize the problem, because there is no way any problem can be solved unless, one, the problem is acknowledged, recognized, identified, and two, it is understood. The problem is understood, which means what causes the problem, what is at the roots of the problem. I've always been very inclined to use the case of Ebola to make that point. Now, the first part was very easy to acknowledge that there was a problem. When the Ebola outbreak happened a few years ago, the first part was to identify the problem, to acknowledge the problem, the Ebola. It was not difficult. That aspect of it was not difficult at all. Everybody acknowledged, everybody understood, everybody panicking that there was an outbreak. Now, the second part was the difficult part. If you recall, that there was a race for a cure not because anything other than the fact that scientists could not understand how the roots of the problem, the Ebola outbreak, what causes it, how it spread, how it evolved, how people are affected by it, and so on and so forth. So all that had to be identified in order for a cure to be proposed. And as it was pretty obvious by the time that the scientific community figured out exactly this whole thing, the scientific community was able to bring a solution to the problem. There is a third aspect, which we're not there at the third aspect yet in terms of the discussion of race relation in America, which is once a cure is proposed for all concerned parties to be inoculated, to administer, and of course the interaction and the follow-up, which is make certain that the solution works. Now, those steps, although I mentioned those steps for a medical problem, but those steps can also be applied to race relation in America. The part that everybody's been asking me about, which war, we know that in any war there are plenty of casualties, physical casualties in particular. That's what we take stock of. We acknowledge that 100,000 people die. Well, in the case of the Civil War, we acknowledge that there were close to 1 million casualties, over 600,000 deaths, and the rest were wounded. But there are other aspects of casualty that we usually don't even bother because they're not easily identified and not tangible. And by the time those casualties, those rather who suffered of those casualties, usually are already out of the spotlight. For instance, I always take as an example, when a police officer gunned down an unarmed black individual, the only casualty that we, the public, we seem to focus on is that individual who just got killed. And as far as we're concerned, that's all there is to it. But in reality, casualties continue to mount way beyond the spotlight, way after the spotlight is gone. For instance, after a police officer gunned down an unarmed black man, protests on the street, people ask for justice, and so on and so forth, and the whole thing just died down, and we know the end of the story. A year goes by, there is some similarity, some semblance of justice. Police officer goes to the court and they find out it was justified, and is out on the street again to kill another black individual. Usually that's pretty much it. That's the way it has been going on. Now, the other type of casualties that we never bother and we never follow up on are psychological casualties, emotional casualties, and financial casualty. The individual that got gunned down by the police officer is the physical casualty. That individual could be the breadwinner. Automatically, there is financial casualty that nobody pays attention to, nobody cares, everybody goes about their way, about his or her way, and that family is left to struggle or through this financial casualty that no one sees. And of course, if there are kids involved, those kids suffer emotional, psychological, and of course spouse go through the same thing. Those are casualties that society doesn't even bother, because as far as they're concerned, a person is killed and that's addressed, and that's the end of the story. Now, the use of the War on Blacks banner, again, is not for sensationalism. It is simply to point to the fact that there are indeed many casualties for blacks. Now, I always make a point to bring to the conversation that the discussion of this topic is not a way to bash whites. In fact, if you've been following this conversation, you would remember that I mentioned that there have always been two groups in the country. There are millions of whites who are racist, who discriminate, and there are millions of others who are not racist, who do not discriminate. And during the time we were discussing the period of slavery, we provided examples of whites who put their own lives and the lives of their own families on the line to fight against slavery. And that's what makes the discussion of race relations in America such a difficult topic. But we like to remove the aspect where people say, well, it's just a few people. It's not just a few people. The problem of race in America, racism in America, is widespread. In fact, we have had, even for the past couple of weeks, examples in one aspect, for instance, in the aspect of education. Now, we're not here to discuss that today. We will as we evolve with the discussion of race relations in America, but just the past couple of weeks, we saw how groups of privileged white individuals be able to go through the back doors and pay their way into Ivy League school. In the meantime, we had this individual, Camilla. She's 18, who took the SAT test and had the first time had, I believe, 930, around that score, and she wasn't satisfied with it, and she went and took the test again, and the second time she scored over 1200, and suddenly that she was scrutinized, she was accused of cheating, and so on and so forth. If you're following what is going on across the country, we're not talking about a particular place, a particular section of the country, a particular sector, particular region. It's countrywide. We have a race problem, and in order to solve a problem that I just mentioned, we have to call the devil by its name. It is widespread. It's not just a small group. Whites who feel somewhat on the defensive, they tend to pinpoint to the white nationalists, to the white supremacists as being the cause of the problem. And blacks who are afraid of fraying the relationship that they have with some whites, they too want to pinpoint to the extreme individual who are racist, who discriminate. But that cannot solve the problem if everyone cannot get to the point of understanding that the problem is much widespread than what they're trying to convey. Because no matter where you go, me in particular, I have example of my own. I have example of my own of being a victim of search. Will bring to the surface as well when we get to the point of explaining that it is widespread. Now, some, as I mentioned, because there are two groups of whites in the country, those who are racist and those who are not. But there is no way to identify, to meet with someone and then say, yep, that person is racist, up, that person is not. There is no way to do that. However, there are telltale signs that would give you an idea if you spend a few minutes talking to someone, you will start getting a sense as to whether that person is racist or has racist view or not. Now, because it is widespread, let's call the devil by its name. Why try to sugarcoat that? Why try to and whites, especially those who are not racist, shouldn't feel uncomfortable with the discussion, because as I mentioned, and it's not small, that you would find that there are whites who put during slavery time, who put their lives on the line, and there is a specific gentleman that I did take as an example. It's John, who not only put his life on the line, but he also put the lives of 5 of his children, sons, on the line, fighting to end slavery. And mind you, at a time that not even the slaves were aware that was happening. So yes, we acknowledge that this problem, that line, that divide groups of whites in the country, make the discussion of race relation even more difficult, because it's not a one-size-fits-all. And the discussion here on race relation is not to bash one party or another, but to point to the problem and hopefully work towards a solution. Because me personally, I am very keen to the fact that the culture, I could be talking to someone and can tell the difference, a white individual, between someone who is racist and someone who simply expresses himself or herself, not knowing what he or she says is actually a racist language, because there is that too. We have to be able to identify those, because not everybody who says something racist actually intends it to be racist. Because if you've been living in a particular environment, you are influenced, you are impacted by your environment, and if you move into another environment, there is some learning for the new environment. That is the purpose of race relation. Now, what happens to blacks beyond the Civil War? It is a topic where it is an aspect of the topic we will continue to debate as we move forward with the discussion of race relation in America. When we come back, we will talk a little bit about anti-Semitism, which is also another topic that's been hotly debated in Washington and across the country, and we'll show you why this topic now is the hot topic of conversation. We'll be right back.
I am MD, host of the 4th Branch program. War on Blacks is a topic added to the 4th Branch programming in order to discuss the intricacies, the complexities of race relation in America. The goal is threefold. 1. To bring attention to the various forms of prejudice, discrimination, and racism in the country. 2. To expose the undeniable presence of such in every aspect of life and every corner of our society. 3. To extricate us all from the ignorance, the indifference, or the complicity. The ultimate objective is to make the discussions of those issues, racism, prejudice, discrimination, a normal part of our lives. Then, and only then, will we as a society be able to eradicate the problem. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Abraham Joshua Heschel exclaimed, "Racism is man's gravest threat to man, the maximum of hatred for the minimum of reason. Join me in the journey to restore equality. Or would you please get out of the way? Thank you. What is anti-Semitism? Anti-Semitism, in its simplest form or definition, is hatred for the Jews. Now, just like racism, no one would condone anti-Semitism. No one would accept the behavior of anti-Semitics. But it seems, although we're not gonna try to make a distinction between someone who is anti-Semitic and someone who is racist, it seems to be the same, but it is not. There is slight difference. But we bring you the topic of anti-Semitism because you may recall 2-3 weeks ago, this Congressman, Ilhan Omar, Congresswoman from who represent the 5th district in the state of Minnesota, there was a streak of tweet exchange which took place, and one of the particular statement that Mrs. Omar made, it's about Benjamin, triggered an outrage all across the country. She was chastised for using anti-Semitic language. Now, the context, in case you haven't been watching or following this whole debate, she suggested that Jewish lobbying groups I guess supporting campaign finance for legislators on both sides, Democrats and Republicans, are the reason that Israel gets so much support, so many policy friendly, if you like, towards Israel. This is the first time that you've seen condemnation across the board. Both in Washington, Democrats and Republicans condemn anti-Semitism. And over the waves, the airwaves that is, there was no lack of conversation. Republicans in particular seized on that to call, it's almost like there is some sort of match between Democrats and Republicans. See, you have people on your side too who are anti-Semitic. It's not us. It's not just us. Sad story.
And Republican legislators, of course, seize on that to try to force the hands of the Democrats to do something drastic. Now, I'm not going to rehash the story because we talked about that a couple of weeks now. Once again, all those different topics that we discuss are archived on the People Branch YouTube channel. So I again would encourage you to visit the People Branch YouTube channel. And I also did write an article about that particular topic, which you can find on the peoplebranch.org website. On the peoplebranch.org, we also publish an article as a rebuttal to Glenn Greenwald, who wrote an article, who published an article in the Washington Post at that time, and who called Mrs. Moore the Steve King of the left. I would encourage you to take a look at the People Branch website as well and read the article. That was a complete rebuttal for the article in the Washington Post. Now, again, without having to rehash the whole debate about the fact that Mrs. Omar, by saying it's about the Benjamin, considered as anti-Semitic, but for the first time across the United States of America, both Democrats and Republicans rally towards one goal: to condemn anti-Semitism. Now we're going to talk about anti-Semitism, but when was the last time you seen the country united to condemn racism? Can you recall any time that happened? The last time, well, the country wasn't united, but at least there were enough people on one side that said slavery was bad and there was civil war. But beyond that, I cannot read anything anywhere when the whole country was united to condemn racism. In fact, that's something that's been happening in Washington for as long as I have been following politicians in Washington. Never happened. And which brings me to something exactly that Mrs. Omar said. The Speaker of the House, in just a matter of a day or so, already thought about passing a resolution, and sure enough, a resolution was passed that banned anti-Semitism, racism, Islamophobia, and so on. But we all know that the point to the resolution was to be against anti-Semitism. And the reason we know that for a fact is because racism, languages, action, policies, legislation have been in Washington forever. And nobody, not Democrat, not Republican, ever bothers to do that. Steve King, that Glenn Greenwald tried to compare Mrs. Omar to, has been in Washington since 2003, 2004. And he's been that white supremacist, that racist individual for as long as he's been in Washington. And there's been nothing. Now, Republicans try to say, well, you see, we chastised him, we excluded him from all committees. That was January 2019. Steve King has been in Washington for 15 years. So really, if the idea was to do something about racism, it's not just in 2019 that they would have done something about it. That was just window dressing. And besides, we know we have in the Oval Office a president who is overtly racist. I never seen any Republican coming and say anything and condemn what Donald Trump has been saying. So it's window dressing. Now let's get back to the issue at hand. Now the very fact that a resolution was passed actually corroborated the story that Mrs. Omar was trying to say. Because again, as I mentioned, all this time in Washington, there has never been anything passed to condemn racism. And suddenly, that it is believed that Mrs. Omar's language was anti-Semitic, within a matter of days, there was a resolution. So yes, Mrs. Omar was absolutely right that there is a bias, an inclination, a tendency to support Israel above all. Now, there is nothing wrong about supporting a country. This is not a conversation. We're not saying that it's bad to support Israel, but the point, put it in its context. The context was when Mrs. Omar said it's all about the Benjamin. Now, what she was, if you put it in its context, it is absolutely true. It is about the Benjamin. Now, we cannot discard the fact that in Washington, there are tons of lobbying groups, and there are Jewish lobbying groups as well. There is nothing to argue there. There is nothing to discuss there. That's, unfortunately, that's the corruption that we have in our government, that there are so many lobbying groups that pay, that finance campaign for different senators, and so that they can have policy friendly for their countries, for their cause, and so on and so forth. So far, I am at a disadvantage trying to understand where is the anti-Semitic language, because what Mrs. Omar said, it's about the Benjamin. We can trace that back to all lobbying groups giving money and in order to influence senators, whether Democrat or Republican, to do things that's beneficial, that's friendly to their causes. Now, is that anti-Semitic? Let's take a look at using a different aspect of the conversation. What if she said that about a different country? What would that be? The same context, nothing different. The same context, except that instead of Israel, instead of Jews, it's a different country. The reason I ask that to have that exercise is to ask the obvious question. Is any criticism of Israel anti-Semitic? That's the question. Again, I want everyone to understand that there is legitimacy in criticizing Israel for a lot of wrongdoing that Israel has, a crime even, has committed in the war. And we will show you a clip of that in a minute. But it seems that anything that says, if it's not flattery, anything that says, if it's not positive towards Israel, automatically the individual will be labeled anti-Semitic. Because I am waiting for someone to explain to me, in the context that Mrs. Omar said, it's about the Benjamin, as to what is anti-Semitic about it. The fact that she suggested that Jewish laws are paying senators, both Democrat and Republican, to have policy friendly, to have their agenda being looked at in a more positive way. Is that untrue? We've done that for Jews, we've done that for French, we've done that for Italian, for Great Britain, we've done that for all the countries in the world. Well, not all the countries, but they have lobbying groups in Washington, and Paul Manafort is sitting in jail. And if you remember, he was doing lobbying for Ukraine. So the question is what Mrs. Omar said anti-Semitic because it's towards Israel, or is it anti-Semitic, period? That's what I try to understand. I want someone, Jew or non-Jew, to explain it to me in the context, not outside the context, in the context that Mrs. Omar said it. Now, if that's the case, if we already established that the resolution was passed because it was a statement said towards Israel that everybody thinks is not friendly enough, so it is anti-Semitic. And we already established that it is indeed for that reason, because Washington never cares about anybody being racist. Democrat or Republican, they never care. In fact, they just think it's okay. Steve King has been in Washington for 15 years and has been saying things that are blatantly racist, and nobody seemed to ever care. There was never a resolution passed against Steve King. So we know, no matter how much spin that's put in that Mrs. Omar must have been right by saying it's all about the Benjamin, because there seemed to be an inclination to always come to the rescue of Israel, of the Jews, even when what they do is wrong. And that's the point, and that's the reason we ask the very question: what is anti-Semitism? What is exactly anti-Semitism? If you say anything that's not good, that's not positive about Israel, are you anti-Semitic? Now, I love this little cartoon, which seems to illustrate a very important point about the idea of anti-Semitism. Israel, everybody knows, did go through some really very rough time in its existence. History reports that in Germany, close to 6 million Jews were slaughtered under this iron fist of Adolf Hitler. 6 million Jews, that's really what you would call hatred for the Jews. This is not small. So anybody who would condone anti-Semitism would not have a place in our society. I happen to believe that what Mrs. Omar said was not anti-Semitic. It simply was flattering. It wasn't positive towards Israel, but I happen to believe it was not anti-Semitic. Now, one thing about that Israel in particular has been doing, the leaders have been exploiting the idea of anti-Semitism, because no matter what they do, no matter how cruel their actions are, the minute someone raises the flag about the crime, they scream anti-Semitism. And that's been the pattern, and that's been the behavior of Israel in general, and which makes it difficult, if it's not impossible, to make certain that they do the right thing, because they continue to do wrong, and yet nobody can hold Israel accountable, because, well, if you do, you are anti-Semitic. Now, here is something that you could say is anti-Semitic. This is anti-Semitism. I guess the Thai part is missing on this. This is anti-Semitism. This is anti-Semitism. What you're reading on the screen, if you were to see a sign like this anywhere, then that would be absolutely anti-Semitism. That would be anti-Semitic. Is it anti-Semitic to criticize Israel for killing children? That is the question, because it seems that there is room left in Israel or here in America. Every time that the word Israel or Jews are used, unless it's something positive, it is anti-Semitic. And everybody, when Mrs. Omar made the statement, it's all about the Benjamin, for the first time in the United States of America, across the board, everyone was united to condemn anti-Semitism. That already explained that what she said in the context that she said was anti-Semitic, except that, well, it wasn't favorable to Israel, it wasn't favorable to Jews, and everybody jumped it anti-Semitic. Now, Israel has been doing what you see on the screen to the Palestinian, to civilian, for decades now. But every time the world body wants to make a move to call Israel to answer for its crime, Israel, the leaders cry anti-Semitism. Of course, they always get shielded by the United States, who has become complicit in the crime that Israel has been committing towards the Palestinian. And which is the irony of this whole conversation, that you have a people who were slaughtered, their ancestors were slaughtered by a cruel individual, Adolf Hitler. They suffered greatly. Nobody can argue that against history. But for reasons that continue to challenge me, Israel deliberately go in a campaign to kill civilian, and by deliberately, I don't mean that lightly. I don't mean that just to be anti-Semitic. I mean that literally. And I'm going to show you example of, in the summer of 2014, you may not recall, well, despite the fact that the government would, but most people here who claim to so much in love with Israel, I'm not referring to Jews, of course they stay in touch with their home country. But most Americans who so jumpy to defend Jews and Israel, whenever there is anything that's going on in the Middle East, which is often, they always aware of only one side of the story. The other side, nobody knows about it, because here in America, we bring to the surface, we parade across all the network, Jewish group, Jewish politician, coming to all the different media and talking about what's going on, giving their side of the story. We don't hear anything from the Palestinian, and as such, the United States of America is biased. So Palestinians are criminal, just like we do here towards blacks. All blacks are criminal. That's why we condone police officers executing blacks and do nothing about it. The same principle, the same behavior that the United States Americans have in regards to what's going on in the Middle East. Because Israel has all the media open, to talk about, to simply give their side of the story and dress it the way that they want it to be dressed. And there is nobody in the Palestinian side because we would not invite them. That's number one. And number two, even if we invite a Palestinian, it would be on occasion, you would only hear mostly the voices of Israel all over the place, all the time. But Palestinian, if we invite, it would be just on occasion, which means drop in the bucket, but Israel continue to cover the airwaves, and that's what makes the predicament in the Middle East almost an impossibility to resolve, because everybody here in America, the government tells us this is the way it is, and we have the backing of all the leaders in Israel coming and filling the airwaves with their version. In the meantime, what's going on in the Middle East, Israel is doing exactly the same thing that Germany was doing to Jews under Adolf Hitler. They literally slaughtering, they literally decimating the Palestinian. But contrary to Germany, nobody knew when those things were happening, and nobody could, because there was, at some point, there was World War II. But today, we are in possession of information, in possession of knowledge, in possession of data, and yet we in the Western world just turn a blind eye towards Israel doing exactly to the Palestinian what they suffer under Germany during the era of Adolf Hitler. But every time someone raised the issue, God forbid, you are anti-Semitic. And that's flashing anti-Semitism card is an article, one of many, that I wrote about Israel. And it is an article that I published right after the summer of 2014, during which time, which is the clip I'm about to show you, during which time Israel deliberately, knowingly bomb a civilian building in which that civilian were taking shelter. And by saying deliberately, knowingly, and I mean that literally, and I will explain in just a moment. But first, an announcement.
Hi, I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program. War on Blacks is a topic added to the Fourth Branch programming in order to discuss the intricacies, the complexities of race relation in America. The goal is threefold. 1. To bring attention to various forms of prejudice, discrimination, and racism in the country. 2. To expose the undeniable presence of such in every aspect of life and every corner of our society. 3. To extricate us all from the ignorance, the indifference, or the complicity. The ultimate objective is to make the discussions of those issues, racism, prejudice, discrimination, a normal part of our lives. Then, and only then, will we as a society be able to eradicate the problem. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Abraham Joshua Heschel exclaimed, "Racism is man's gravest threat to man, the maximum of hatred, for the minimum of reason. Join in journey to restore equality. Or would you please get out of the way? Thank you. In the summer of 2014, there was a war between Israel, not the Palestine, but rather fighters in the Palestine. Now, Hamas, or those individuals call them fighters, freedom fighters for the Palestine, they are no match to Israel. The type of weapons Israel has, those fighters, they do guerrilla technique in order to fight Israel, because they have really no way of fighting a big Goliath such as Israel. Even under the eyes of United Nations, Israel has never shied away from committing war crimes, because they always, or the leaders at the very least, always believe that whenever called to enter the crimes, they would simply have to cry anti-Semitism. And it is something that they've been doing for several decades now. Now, as we promised you, we will take a look at the birth of Israel, because Israel is one of the youngest countries in the world, born in 1947-48, and we will show you that despite the fact it is such a young country, the crimes that Israel has committed, there is, the only thing I can think of, there is no country in the world that would have committed those crimes and would have not have the Western country go to war with that country. And yet, Israel continued to be shielded, and they continue to scream anti-Semitism whenever they are called to answer for their crimes. Here is a short clip of the damages that was done during the summer of 2014. Now, here's the context so that you get a sense when I say that Israel deliberately, knowingly, and it was not just a statement. In the summer of 2014, Israel was fighting the fighters in Palestine. And of course, its war machine was marching towards the Palestine. And in the process, Israel was bombing different locations that, well, they believe the fighters were located. But what actually caught our attention, because war, as you know, will always bring casualties, and more likely usually on both sides. But as I mentioned earlier, Hamas, or the freedom fighters in the Palestines, are no match to Israel. But what caught our attention is the following. Israel was about to bomb a building, and in that building there was no fighters. There were just civilians, women, children mostly. Now, Israel could have claimed, well, we didn't know that. But
unfortunately, the leaders could not claim that, and here's the reason. United Nations at that time was on the ground, and that particular building was marked as being the building the civilian women and children were sheltered in, including a few UN workers. Now, during the process, however, that was happening in Israel, UN communicated with the decision makers in Israel. Not once, not twice, not 3 times, not 4 times, not 5 times, but 18 times. Yes, read correctly. 18 times. 17, 18. 18 times. To tell Israel that particular building shelters women, children, civilian. And we have some of our UN workers in that building. Israel bombed the building anyway. Is it anti-Semitic to call Israel to answer for its crime? Is it anti-Semitic to force the leaders in Israel to answer for their crime? Is it? I do thank you for spending the time with me. I hope those information were useful to you. Should you have any question, suggestion, comment, criticism, please do not hesitate to contact us. If you should have a topic you would like us to talk about, please let us know. We will research it. We will debate it right here on the Fourth Branch program, the place for common sense. In the meantime, I hope you have a wonderful afternoon, and I hope to see you again next time. Good day.
The Fourth Branch podcast is brought to you in collaboration with the People Branch publication, which can be found on the People Branch website, located at peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org website, in which you will find a number of very interesting articles. My name is Mike Duchesne, MD for short. I hope you have a great afternoon or a great evening, whichever it happens to be. Hopefully you can join me again next time for another interesting episode of this podcast. That was the Fourth Branch, live from New York. Good day.
What if hip-hop never existed? Question. Do you think there'd be as many heads screaming out, stop snitching? What if Adam and Eve ain't eat the fruit? You think we'd be able to see the truth? Or what if Albert Einstein ain't think of the nuke? Cause the Western ain't teach us to shoot. You think there'd be as many plays out there if there was no booth? Matter of fact, what if white man hung off a noose? Would it still be cool to say nigga? Or maybe we would make six figures? Or would we wanna be crackers? And all the whites would be rappers. What if Martin Luther King survived? You think the New Orleans flood would have caused him to drop and die? I wonder what if and see what is. Stand back from the picture and ask yourself why. What if life wasn't all you thought? What if everything was gone? What if we switched to rights and wrongs? You think you'd change your route to the road we on? What if life wasn't all you thought? What if everything you knew was gone? What if we switched to rights and wrongs? You think you'd change your route to the road we on? If Christopher Wallace never got murked, how much money would Sean Carter be worth? What if Tupac never got hit with the flame? Would the game still have change filled with these lames? What if Jabari wasn't speeding down the street? What if the bullet Malcolm sent never hit seat? A black guy at the house instead of the stop. Or Ali never got bopped by the cops. What if the little homie Easy didn't die? Stand back from the picture and ask yourself why. What if life wasn't all you thought? What if everything you knew was gone? What if we switched to rights and wrongs? You think you'd change your route to the road we on? What if life wasn't all you thought? What if everything you knew was gone? What if we switched to rights and wrongs? You think you'd change your route to the road we on?